Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again from Film Fanatic headquarters. Hope everyone's doing good. So it is Thursday morning at 10:34. Sort of a nice day. So yesterday was not a very nice day weather-wise, but otherwise than otherwise of that or than that, I've been still cranking out the videos here. I've been setting things up. I set up a few videos. I uploaded a few videos the last couple days. I've been setting things up as premieres, so to kind of space things out a little bit. Never want to be, overstay your welcome and be too, for people to be too inundated for things. So I'm trying to space things out a little bit, but cranking out the videos. Nevertheless, there's always stuff to talk about and great movies, awesome movies to talk about, and also so many great music albums that I've been discovering. I've always had music as being a really big part of this channel. So I've been doing more music oriented shows. Today is going to be a music show as well. So that's a lot of fun. And I also just uploaded a video talking about the MCU, the Marvel Universe, and my feelings around it. It's been going on for, just about 20 years now. And I kind of talked about my thoughts around where it's at now. I did see last weekend, I went to go see the latest Marvel movie, Thunderbolts. So I talked about that. I also uploaded a review of that movie that's coming soon. And and again, I mainly talked about the kind of the fatigue and a lot of the disappointment I've had with the Marvel movies for the last handful of years, maybe even more at this point. But I tried to talk about the movies that I really love in the MCU, especially like the first phase. The whole universe was kind of kicked off with the very first Iron Man film with Robert Downey Jr., which is an amazing movie. So I tried to, even though it's been in a very negative space for me, although I thought Thunderbolts was pretty good in some ways, but I still feel really, I don't know, kind of let down and underwhelmed by that movie, even though I feel it was significantly better in some ways than a lot of the movies that have been coming out. And some people have said, well, it's kind of gotten the Marvel Universe back on track, more or less. But I don't know if I'd go to that extent. I mean, it's good and it's watchable and there is some cool things about it, but I don't know if I'd go that far. And I talked about, but mainly with the show I just uploaded that's coming pretty soon, and I said as a premiere, I talked about more or less the first phase of the Marvel Universe and how there's just so many incredible films. I'm a comic book nerd at heart. I last night I watched Avengers: Infinity War, which I've done multiple shows on that movie, and I think pound for pound that's the greatest comic book movie ever made. So I just talked about the really fantastic films that have come out in the universe, especially early on. But anyway, today's show is going to be is a music oriented show, and I'm going to be doing probably today's Thursday, so probably pretty soon, probably this weekend, I'm going to be doing some more music shows. I'm going to be doing a couple of I'm going to probably be doing a show or two about my band Quantum. We have some shows coming up and some big shows that I'm really excited about, especially the All Roads Festival. So I'm going to probably do a little show about that coming up, and then we have this other show coming up the week after for it's a benefit concert with a bunch of other bands for the school music school in town that is just fantastic, or I should say in Rockport, Midcoast Music Academy. they're doing these summer camps for the kids, and they do these concerts, and this whole fundraiser is for that. So very very excited about that. So I'm gonna probably there'll be some promotion coming up pretty soon for that, and then also there has been already, but I'm gonna do a big push for that this week, after this weekend, or starting this weekend. And I will probably do some video stuff about that too. Just a little extra promotion. So anyway, I went. It was about 2 weeks ago. I think almost 2 weeks ago. I went to and discovered. I discovered and heard about this record shop that just opened about. I think it was. I think it was opened about a year to 2 years ago, but I just went to it for the first time almost 2 weeks ago, and I was blown away by this shop, and it's in Biddeford, Maine. It had been a place that I've been wanting to go to for a while. Color Sound Oblivion. It's in Biddeford, Maine. It's run by Rennie Brecht, who is a really talented and super creative force in the Portland music scene. He kind of does a lot of kind of ambient bass, a lot of experimental noise projects or oriented projects. Pretty versatile. He has, he wears a lot of different hats. He does original music. He also does DJing. He also plays with other groups. Really creative guy. He has this one group in particular called Scrotal Tear, which is this really awesome band. It was the first time I saw Rennie perform, and also first time I met him, which was probably about 6 or 7 years ago now. And it was an amazing experience. I saw him open up for this other incredible noise artist, Pharmacon, and that was at Geno's in Portland. And that was a really great. That was a just a killer show. It was probably one of the best shows I ever saw at Geno's, if not the best one. So that's kind of where it started. But about a couple of years ago, he opened up a record shop, and I'd been trying to go down, and I finally went that about 2 weeks ago, and I got some really fantastic music. And now I have to say that this record shop is, it has tons of, they sell a lot of records. They do sell books. They sell cassettes, but they have a massive CD collection. And the variety of stuff that they have, and it mostly, I'd say most of the time, or it really specializes in a lot of kind of underground, kind of art art house. Well, not art house, but art noise music, if you will. A lot of it's predominantly, which for me was the biggest attraction to go down there. The main focus of the shop, it seems to be, is, well, experimental noise kind of stuff, but overall electronic music, and it's just fabulous. I saw so many groups and bands and CDs and albums by people that I had never heard of before, and there was a few artists that I recognized. That's how deep the well is as far as what he showcases at this shop. And it's so great because, again, I went in with my friend Mike, and we were in there for a couple of hours. I could have spent all day in there. If I had the money and the cash flow, I would have bought like 1,000 CDs in there. It was insane. But the cool thing was like, I went in there, and about 95%, 96, 97% even, of the artists and bands I came across, I had no idea who they were. But the thing that is so cool, the way the shop is organized, is on each album or each CD, every record, every cassette, there's a really in-depth kind of description of, what kind of style the music is, and also other artists that it is similar to. So you have a reference point, and it's so organized that way. So like if you're in a mood for like, you know, something say like Ministry or like Godflesh, you can find, you know, 10,000 different bands that are kind of similar in nature but are, you know, way more obscure. And that's it's amazing. It's amazing that way. And so you come across all of this stuff that is so unknown, and you have no idea what it is, but it looks really interesting. And there's no way of telling necessarily what that is, because that happens in a lot of record shops where, you know, other places. Well, like I go to Bull Moose a lot, and I've discovered a lot of bands through that too, and movies, especially movies. But you know, if I don't know who the band is or whatnot, there's no like significant reference point as to what it is. A lot of the times when I'm at Bull Moose and I come across an album or a band that I might have heard of or that just looks interesting, I will like have to look it up, and I'll do a little bit of, you know, I'll look it up on my phone and I'll find out some things about it. And then I'll be like, "Oh, okay, this sounds like this would be, you know, kind of my alley. This sounds like this would be really cool." So then I'll buy it or not, you know. But with the way this record shop is set up, is it's all that kind of work is done for you, especially when you're coming across an unknown artist, but it sounds interesting to you. You know, it could be you pick up a CD and you see some artwork and it sounds, you know, it looks really, you know, artwork looks awesome. That's like, you know, your kind of immediate, you know, thing that you have, your interaction, your first interaction. But with this, it takes it a step further because it will specifically say what kind of style of music it is, and again, it will reference other bands in those styles that it sort of sounds like, and so it's really easy to like pick out something. You know, I again, most of the music there is definitely electronic based stuff, but there's a lot of kind of noise experimental music, which I really love. I've always loved that kind of music. I got into it quite a few years ago. It's a massive genre. It's very, you know, you kind of have to be in a certain mindset, I guess, for it. Um, you have to be pretty open minded because some of it is not like, you know, really. Well, it doesn't have it doesn't have your typical kind of convention to it. You know, conventions of like what we think of in musical terms of as far as like, you know, where there's a verse chorus, or you know, maybe there's even a head of the tune, or there's melody or a certain rhythmic kind of template, you know, all these things that we expect from music, you know, when we hear a song or when we hear an album. this this style, the kind of the noise, harsh noise, experimental electronic style, kind of moves away from that, and it's got this. You know, again, it's one of those things where, you know, the more you dive into it, if it's something that you find interesting, like you might hear a group or something that is, you know, that represents that particular style, you dig into it a little bit more, and you can start seeing, well, wow, there is good and bad. There's stuff in it that is, you know, that is maybe more creative than others or more just interesting, but the style itself is very vast, and it's an interesting, you know, exploration. You know, I to me it's like I had this real interesting period of when I discovered world music, and especially reggae music, because I'm a huge fan of reggae music, and especially like the more dub style, which tends to be on the more instrumental side of things. That music, you know, was very, very inspirational to a lot of electronic music. You know, Augustus Pablo and Lee Scratch Perry, where there was a lot of echo and a lot of delay, and that music tends to be a lot more darker, but it has a lot of cool atmosphere. There's a lot of effects. It's very kind of psychedelia sounding, or it has a lot of space. It's got this very, you know, interesting vibe to it, and a lot of that music was hugely influential on, you know, even modern electronic music. And when I first discovered reggae music, like billions of other people, the first time I heard reggae music was basically hearing, like the popular songs by Bob Marley, not the main comedian. But Bob Marley, like hearing No Woman No Cry, or I Shot the Sheriff, like those songs were massive hits, and I remember hearing those for the first time. And and then, I eventually got a couple of Bob Marley albums, and I really loved his music. I still do. But I didn't really. I beyond that, I never really dove for years. I never dove into the style of reggae music and really explored it. It was like on a surface level, and so that was really my only exposure to it. But I never learned how to like play that kind of music, on drum set. But I had a little bit of exposure to that music, and I had this one situation many years ago, which I might have mentioned, but many years ago, I had met some musicians at a jam that, and some of them are still my friends. Mike Whitehead, for instance, who plays bass in Quantum, he was one of those musicians I met. And these guys, when I first met them, they were just incredible. They still are. They were just incredible musicians. They were way more advanced than I was. They were better musicians. They were really seasoned, or they are really seasoned jazz musicians, and just have a tremendous amount of experience with all kinds of things. So when I first met them, I was really young. I was right out of college. I didn't really have the experience, and but I went to this jazz jam that used to happen here in Maine when I first came to Maine in like the late '90s. And I was really young. I was, in my early 20s. I was maybe like 22, 21. My only experience playing music was really playing in rock bands, metal bands, and that was really it. And I had an open mind. I was into hip hop, and I was into like Depeche Mode, and different kinds of music. But I was primarily a metalhead kid, basically. And I still am. I still love that music to death. And that was my only, when it came to my playing experience, that was really it. At that time, I was really, I had just kind of got introduced to jazz. And so had just started kind of like practicing, uh, working on jazz music practice, basically working on different techniques on it. And I was starting to listen to it more and eventually got into the music a lot. Miles Davis, John Coltrane, and things like that. But it was still incredibly foreign to me and new. So I started going to this jam, and I met all these guys, and they were really cool. They were very open. They had a lot of patience with me. They let me sit in, and it was, you know, really a life changing experience because it just opened up so many new things. And luckily, these guys had a lot of patience for me because I was really struggling to kind of to figure that stuff out. And it's still something I still struggle with. I still work a lot on my jazz playing a lot, and that's kind of my passion when it comes to practicing. But it's still really hard. I have to work at it every day. It's not like riding a bike. I think some things can be, but some things can't be. So it's an ongoing process. But at that time, I had zero experience, and I struck up a friendship with them. And one of the guys, Greg McGowan, who was just a phenomenal guitar player, had asked me about doing a gig, and I was like really excited that this really amazing musician who was worlds ahead of me as far as his musical level. I said yes, and I was like, "Yep." I didn't even like ask him anything about it. I just said yes to it automatically. And he said, "Yeah, it's going to be a gig on Islesboro, which is an island about 15 minutes away from here. You take the ferry. It's in Lincolnville. Take the ferry in Lincolnville, and you go over into Islesboro. And it's a small little island where a lot of people live for what the size of it. It's a summer kind of retreat area, pretty touristy. And so Greg had asked me about playing for this uh, private party at this guy's house, and it was going to be a birthday party. So I said, yeah, that would be great. So I just agreed to do it. Didn't know anything about it, and it was going to be some of the other, also involving some of the other guys that were at the jam. Glenn Dubois, and I think Mike actually played at Mike Whitehead, and Bruce Bogey, who was another musician at the time who lived in the area. And I just said yes to it. So we went to met at the ferry. I brought my drums over there, and we drove to the house where the party was. And we get in, we arrive at this house, and it's just like gorgeous. This guy whose party it was very, very wealthy. There's a lot of wealthy people that live over there on the island. So we got to the guy's house, and it was just like, wow, like this house it was kind of like this mansion. It was massive. It was huge. It was gorgeous. So we get to the house, we walk in, and we bring our gear in. And, there were a few people there. There was like maybe 5 or 10 people. And this was going to be a birthday party that he was throwing kind of more or less for himself and his friends. So we get there, we start loading our stuff in. And the guy is like, he had this massive, huge kitchen. And he wanted us to, for whatever reason, he wanted to set the band in this kitchen. He had this big giant kitchen. It was the biggest kitchen I've ever seen. And he had there was a big giant kind of table, and it was just huge and spacious. And he was like, I'd love for you guys to kind of sit up in the kitchen to play. So I was like, okay, that's weird, but let's do it. And then so we set up their gear and everything, and we were getting situated, and we had a little bit of time before we were going to play. And about 5 or 10 minutes before we start playing, Greg and I was assuming that this was going to be, they're that it was going to be more of a blues or a rock gig, and maybe we would be playing some like jazz standards, like tunes like Satin Doll and things like that, like just kind of more laid back tunes. And I thought that's what it was going to be. But I didn't really talk to Greg about specifics, and he didn't really say anything to me about what kind of music we were going to be doing. I was just kind of assuming, and I was wrong in my assumption, as you'll find out. And so I didn't ask any questions about it. I just said yes, and I set up my stuff. And we set up in this rich guy's kitchen, and people were starting to come in, and there was probably like 30 or 40 people that ended up showing up in this big house, and there was a lot of people there. They had all kinds of food and stuff. And so about 5 to 10 minutes before we were going to play, Greg came over to me before we were going to play, and he's like, just to let you know, the guy whose party this is, he really wants us to play mostly reggae music. And I was just like, what? And I literally, I started sweating right away. I got super nervous. I was kind of dumbfounded because I literally had never ever played reggae music before. And my only exposure, like I said before, was hearing like a billion other people, hearing Woman No Cry, and I bought a live reggae album by Bob Marley on cassette. That was my only exposure to reggae music, and I never sat down and tried to learn this style. And it's a very distinct style. It's not rock and roll. And so I was like kind of shitting bricks. And then so they call up the first tune, and I, it was probably one of the hardest gigs I ever had, because I literally I couldn't lock into anything that was going on. I literally faked my way through the entire set, and it was awful. It was terrible. I was struggling with every song, and I don't know how I survived it, but I did. Somehow I survived it, and we got done playing, and those guys were cool about it. They were very, it was pretty obvious I didn't know what the fuck I was doing, and got through the gig somehow, just felt totally humiliated. And and then the end of the night, we packed up and I left, and I was just like, oh my god, I can't believe I played so badly and I said yes to this, and it was a disaster. And so I left there. I left the gig and thinking, okay, these guys are never going to call me back. This was a disaster. I was so unprepared. I had just said yes to something not knowing anything about it, and it was a disaster, I thought. And I was like, these guys are never ever going to call me back. And somehow a month or two later, those guys called me back to play more gigs, and I started playing with them after that fairly regularly, which I have no idea why or what they were thinking, but that's what happened. And around that time, I met a girl who I ended up dating who was really, really into reggae music and world music. And so she kind of exposed me to so much reggae music and a lot of world music, but especially reggae music. So I took this massive, massive deep dive of where I started buying all kinds of reggae albums and listening to so many different styles and realizing, wait, this style is massive. There's so many different subgenres in the style. And at that point I started like to try to figure out what was going on musically, and I started practicing. I started technically learning what that music needed for drums. And it was a huge, as hard as that situation was, it was one of the best things I could have gone through, because you know, I had to go through hell and back through it and barely survived, but it exposed my weaknesses, at an incredibly high level. But ultimately, it turned me on to so much music, and I realized, wait, there's so many other things, and I just had scratched the surface. And that's how I feel with noise music. I think, again, it's an extreme form of art, but again, you see that there's a lot of diversity in that style, and there's a lot of different artists in it. And I tend to feel like what makes it, especially with this kind of music, noise music, because it's so fringe and it's so kind of outside of any tradition. Um, what I've found with it, I mean, yeah, on some level, people think of it as just being just total random bullshit, and just somebody just screaming into a microphone and not having any form of structure or discipline. And I think, yeah, there is facet of that. There is a lot of music in this style that is pure random chaos, and it is, there isn't a sense of melody or rhythmic quality to it. But the deeper I've gotten into this kind of style, and I've loved it for a long time, I've noticed that there's a lot of different subgenres in the style. But I've always found that, like, artists that I have discovered, like I mentioned Pharmacon before, and another group I really, really love, Wopstam from Montreal, is that when I have taken that deep dive and checked out a lot of their music, there really is this discipline behind it. It is really premeditated. It is really, really orchestrated. It's not, there is improv, but there is an aesthetic behind a certain kind of discipline and this real exploratory sense. And to me, that's the stuff I kind of gravitate towards. So it's interesting. But when I was at the record shop, I bought this album that I think is kind of amazing, and it's really good, and it's wild. I had never heard of this artist before, and been really listening to it a lot. It's really interesting, um, really interesting music. And it's this album called Interior Designs, and it was created by a woman called named Jessica Rylan, and it was released in 2006. And the album is called Designs, and really beautiful. It's a CD. It's really beautiful packaging. Can't really see it. It's hard to see. But I just love the packaging. It's real minimalist, but just kind of interesting. It's got a cool little back cover there. Really cool artwork and inside here. And it's got a really cool kind of description by um, Jessica Rylan. But the album is called Interior Designs, and it's definitely noise, I guess you could call it. But it has um, a real, I don't know, musicality to it. It's really, there's a little description of the album that she wrote up, that just Jessica Rylan wrote in the kind of the liner notes, and she kind of talks about this album being, this idea of chaos, and the idea of chaos theory, and where that, in nature there is this chaotic, existence, or we live in this state of chaos and flux, but naturally a lot of things kind of work themselves out through nature. There always is some kind of order and balance, and everything is not just pure randomness. And like this music kind of really explores that, and really, you really get that feeling because the music is really interesting. It's really unpredictable. It's definitely electronica. There's a lot of, I think there's some guitar in this uh, orchestration. There's some synths and keyboards, and there's a lot of kind of effects and reverb and delay. There's some aspects of the music that it gets a little bit harsh and intense, but and then it's also very quiet and meditative. It's a real interesting journey. There's a lot of textural uh, ideas thrown into this music. It's really cool, and it's pretty much a full length album. There's about 7 songs on it, but it's really interesting. It definitely is this kind of artistic exploration of sound, but I find it really engaging. And there's so many different kinds of tones and sounds in this thing that give it kind of a sense of melody. So it's it's a little bit easier to get into as opposed to say some of other styles in the noise genre where it's just really harsh and a lot of distortion. This has a lot of ebb and flow, a lot of tension, a lot of release, a lot of quietness, but then some harsh elements. But there is a melodic kind of landscape also throughout it. It's really cool, and there is a rhythmic thing to it also that kind of feels it kind of gives this feeling of being grounded a little bit. But really cool album. I never knew who she was. I discovered this, but I really love this album. It's really interesting. It's quiet, and meditative, but it's got that noise kind of quality to it. It's very out there. Um, it has a psychedelia element. It's very tranquil, and it's a little bit bizarre and strange at the same time. Very interesting. I really dig this album. Again, the artwork was great, and that's the thing with, like I said, what we're talking about the reggae analogy and my experience. You know, I think you can do the same thing with any genre. It's a massive. Most genres out there, you just scratch the surface, at surface level. That can, you'll either, it'll be something that will kind of be maybe your jam or not. But if you're interested in it, you might find something. If you take that deep dive in that with into that, you take that deep dive into that specific genre, you might find music that really resonates with you. So this is an example of that. Really, really cool. So I definitely recommend this album, Jessica Raylan, Interior Designs. Very cool stuff. Yeah. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.